this agreement whereby government has now agreed that it would arrest Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, were he to step foot in South Africa. This was after the DA wanted the matter to be aired in court, but rather there was an agreement and government paid costs. Somebody that was also involved, or an organization, was the International Commission of Jurists. We didn't get to speak to her earlier, so let's get a quick word from the Africa Director of the International Commission of Jurists, Kajaal Ramjathan Keogh. Ms. Keogh, thank you for joining us. So you were involved. Is it fair enough to say you wanted government, like the DA, you want a government to say, we accept that we have to arrest Vladimir Putin, and we're willing to state it explicitly?
Absolutely. South Africa has international and domestic obligations, and one of these obligations is to the International Criminal Court. We were therefore obliged to accept that obligation and commit to arresting President Putin if he was going to arrive in the country.
I wish you could have debated with our earlier guest. He said, look, these things are complicated and this is a sensitive issue, and it's very unusual for opposition parties to go to court in other countries and deal with matters of international relations, air the country's dirty laundry. So in a sense, that would be the criticism against you as well. What is your response?
Well, if we're looking at a sovereignty versus rule of law argument, if the government could claim sovereignty every time it wanted to abandon international law, and this is both international conventions as well as our own laws, these would be pointless. And the process for giving effect to treaties and international conventions must go through Parliament, which is a much clearer expression of state sovereignty.
All right, so you believe it was valid to look at this as a purely legal issue. Are you happy with the outcome? Because at one point the president was suggesting that the constitutional obligation to protect South Africa from war may be more important than the ICC Rome Statute that has been codified into our law. Do you accept that government has now backed down on that argument completely?
Government has backed down on that argument. In fact, there was no evidence to show that any kind of threat has been made by the Russian authorities against South Africa. In the affidavit filed by the government, there was some comments made in respect of the threat of war. This was directed at Germany, not at South Africa. So for government to raise that as a reason for not proceeding and not upholding its international obligations would have been unthinkable. So I do have to say that I commend the South African government. The state has emerged positively from this case, unlike in the al-Bashir matter, and they must be congratulated on this. Despite this, we have observed some erratic behavior on behalf of the state throughout this matter.
So what you're saying, despite that erratic behavior, there has been something of a diplomatic coup here, in that the president of Russia, who can be pretty bullheaded reportedly, has said that he won't come.
Absolutely. I think that is the best case scenario outcome for South Africa, that President Putin will not arrive in the country, and that there is now an agreement, a court agreement, a consent agreement, that South Africa has acknowledged their obligations and has said that if President Putin ever arrives in this country, there will be an obligation to arrest him based on these international and domestic legal obligations.
All right, thank you. That was Kajaal Ramjathan Keogh, Africa Director of the International Commission of Jurists, also involved in the court case that resulted in that agreement today.